Welcome to Ink and Evidence, where silence tells stories, and every clue brings us closer to the truth. From chilling crime cases to unsolved mysteries and secrets the world tried to forget, we uncover what lies beneath. If you dare to question, if you seek the truth, then you're exactly where you need to be. Tell us where you're watching this video from. Your feedback always inspires us. Stay tuned to solve the mystery, because the truth always leaves a trace.
Let's begin today's story, The Locked Key at Birchwood House. Chapter 1. The question Miss Marple asked about the key no one could use. The key arrived before the rain. It lay upon the silver salver in the entrance hall of Birchwood House, placed there as neatly as a calling card, though no one admitted to having brought it in. Miss Eleanor Finch noticed it at once. She had arrived that afternoon in a modest gray motorcar, carrying one small traveling case, a folded umbrella, and the quiet expression of a woman who had learned that houses, like people, often revealed most when they were trying hardest to appear respectable. Birchwood House stood at the edge of the village, half hidden behind tall beech trees and a long, curving drive. Its windows looked outward with a pale, watchful dignity. Ivy climbed the stonework. Smoke rose from two chimneys. Beyond the rear gardens, the land fell away toward a dark ribbon of woodland where the wind moved softly, even when the air elsewhere was still. Mrs. Clara Ashbourne, the mistress of the house, greeted Miss Finch with nervous warmth. "You are very kind to come," she said. "I would not have troubled you, but my aunt always said you had a gift for noticing what others overlooked." Miss Finch smiled gently. Most things are overlooked because people decide too quickly what they are looking at. Clara did not answer. Her eyes moved almost unwillingly toward the salver. There it was. A long black key. Old-fashioned, heavy, too large for any modern lock in common use. Its shaft was dark with age, its bow worked into the shape of two interlocking leaves. A narrow strip of faded blue ribbon had been tied through it. Miss Finch removed her gloves slowly. "May I?" Clara nodded. Miss Finch lifted the key. It had a surprising weight, cold even in the warm hall. Not merely old, she thought, used. The metal near the teeth was bright in places, as though handled recently. "Where was this found?" she asked. "On that tray," Clara whispered, "at breakfast. And before breakfast. It was not there last night." A footman passing near the staircase stopped as though the words had caught him by the collar. Clara noticed and dismissed him with a faint gesture. He went, but not before Miss Finch had seen the quick fear in his face. "Who first saw it?" Miss Finch asked. "My cousin Julian." At that moment, a man came down the stairs with deliberate care. He was perhaps 45, pale, elegant, and tired in a way that seemed practiced rather than accidental. Julian Ashbourne had the soft hands of a man who never lifted anything heavier than a glass of port, yet his eyes were sharp. "So this is the famous Miss Finch," he said, "come to solve the mystery of a useless key." Miss Finch looked at him pleasantly. Useless things are rarely preserved with blue ribbon. A shadow crossed his face, brief but distinct. Before he could reply, another voice entered from the drawing room. "It is not useless." The speaker was Mrs. Beatrice Vale, Clara's widowed aunt, a tall woman dressed in black silk, with silver hair arranged perfectly and a face that had once been handsome and had never forgiven age for arriving. She stood very still, one hand resting on the doorframe. "That key," she said, "belongs to the east wing." Clara turned sharply, "But the east wing has been locked for 20 years. "Yes," Beatrice said, "that is why no one should have it." Miss Finch placed the key back on her palm and studied it again. "Who locked the east wing?" "My husband," Beatrice replied. "And where is the lock now?" "There is no lock." The hall grew quiet. Julian gave a small laugh. "My aunt means the door was sealed, bolted from the inside, plastered over and covered with paneling. Very dramatic, very unnecessary, and very Birchwood." Miss Finch glanced toward Clara. "Why was it sealed?" Clara lowered her eyes. "Because my uncle died there." The rain began then, light at first, touching the tall windows with soft fingers. Dinner at Birchwood House was served beneath portraits of Ashbournes whose painted faces seemed to disapprove of conversation. Miss Finch observed more than she spoke. Clara tried to appear calm. Julian drank too quickly. Beatrice ate almost nothing. Mr. Edmund Rusk, the family solicitor, arrived late and claimed the roads were bad, though his boots were dry. A young maid named Alice dropped a spoon when the East Wing was mentioned. After dinner, Clara showed Miss Finch to the upper corridor. The paneling stood at the far end, darker than the rest. There, Clara said, behind that wall. Miss Finch approached it. The wood smelled faintly of polish and damp. At shoulder height, just where a hand might rest while turning an invisible handle, the dust had been disturbed. Has anyone touched this recently? No. Miss Finch bent closer. There, caught in a narrow crack between two panels, was a thread of blue silk, the same shade as the ribbon tied to the key. Behind them, somewhere deep within the sealed wall, something made a sound. Not loud, not even certain. A soft, deliberate click, like a key turning in a lock that no longer existed. Chapter 2. Miss Marple arrives at Birchwood House beneath the autumn rain. The sound seemed to linger long after it had ended. No one spoke. The corridor stood silent beneath the low glow of the wall lamps while rain whispered against the distant windows. Miss Eleanor Finch remained motionless beside the paneled wall, one hand resting lightly upon the wood. "Did you hear it?" Clara asked at last. "Yes." Julian forced a laugh that sounded thinner than before. "Old houses make noises." "Not usually an answer to a key," Miss Finch said quietly. The remark settled over them like dust. No one seemed eager to continue the conversation. A few minutes later, they parted for the evening. Yet Miss Finch did not immediately retire. Instead, she sat beside her bedroom window overlooking the dark gardens and watched the rain drift through the glow of a distant lantern. Birchwood House felt awake despite the late hour. Large houses often did. Timbers shifted, pipes sighed, wind explored forgotten corners. But something else moved within Birchwood. Something less natural. Around midnight, she heard footsteps. Slow, measured, passing along the corridor outside. She opened her door. The passage was empty. Only shadows remained. Yet the carpet held a faint trail of moisture. Someone had walked there recently. Someone who had come in from the rain. Miss Finch followed the marks. They led toward the far end of the corridor, toward the paneled wall, then vanished. Not faded. Vanished, as though the person had simply ceased to exist. She stood studying the carpet for several moments before returning quietly to her room. Sleep arrived late. Morning came gray and cold. The rain had ended. Mist drifted above the lawns beyond the windows. At breakfast, the atmosphere felt strained. Clara seemed exhausted. Julian was unusually cheerful. Beatrice barely touched her tea. Only Mr. Rusk appeared entirely composed. Miss Finch observed them all while discussing harmless subjects. Then Alice entered carrying a silver tray. Her face looked pale. "Excuse me, madam," she said to Clara. "This was found in the library." Upon the tray rested a folded sheet of paper. No envelope. No signature. Clara unfolded it. The color drained from her face. Julian reached across. "What is it?" She handed him the note. His smile disappeared instantly. Miss Finch extended her hand. Julian hesitated before passing it over. The message contained only 6 words. "The key opens more than one door." Nothing else. No name. No explanation. The handwriting appeared deliberate. Neat. Almost elegant. Miss Finch examined the ink. "Fresh. Very fresh." "Who discovered this?" she asked. "Alice," Clara replied. The maid swallowed nervously. "It was lying on the desk, miss." "Was anyone in the library before breakfast?" "No, miss." Miss Finch folded the note carefully. "Then someone was awake during the night." Nobody answered. After breakfast, she requested a tour of the grounds. Clara accompanied her. Birchwood's garden stretched across several acres. Stone paths wound between hedges and old yew trees. Beyond them stood a neglected orchard where fallen apples lay scattered among wet grass. The house looked different from outside. Older, more secretive, particularly the eastern side. The sealed wing projected outward from the main structure like a forgotten thought. Its windows had been boarded years ago. Ivy climbed the stone walls. Several panes remained visible beneath the growth, clouded with age. Miss Finch stopped. Something caught her eye. One upper window, third from the end. The ivy surrounding it appeared disturbed. Recent, not enough to be obvious, enough to be noticed. She stepped closer. Clara followed her gaze. What is it? The leaves. They always move in the wind. Not like that. The stems nearest the window had been broken. A few hung loose. Fresh green showed where older growth had snapped. Someone had pushed through recently. But from which side? Miss Finch said nothing. Instead, she continued walking. Near the orchard, they encountered the gardener. Thomas Reed was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s who had worked at Birchwood House most of his life. He removed his cap respectfully. "Morning, miss." Miss Finch asked him a few casual questions about the grounds. The weather, the trees, the condition of the estate. Then she asked about the east wing. The old gardener grew visibly uncomfortable. Haven't been near there in years. Why not? Orders. From whom? From the master before he passed. Miss Finch studied him. Did he ever explain why? The gardener looked toward the distant house. No, miss. Then after a pause he added, but folk in the village talk. What do they say? That the room wasn't locked to keep people out. Clara stared at him. What do you mean? The old gardener hesitated. His weathered hands tightened around his cap. They say it was locked to keep something in. The words lingered among the trees. A rook called somewhere above them. Then silence returned. Later that afternoon, Miss Finch visited the village. Birchwood House dominated local conversation, even when no one intended to mention it. The baker lowered his voice when speaking of the estate. The postmaster glanced over his shoulder before answering questions. The elderly woman running the bookshop became particularly interesting. Mrs. Harrow had lived in the village nearly 80 years. She remembered things, and unlike many villagers, she did not fear remembering them. People still speak of that night, she told Miss Finch. What night? The night Mr. Ashbourne died. Miss Finch waited. The old woman adjusted her spectacles. The official story was heart failure. And unofficially, Mrs. Harrow smiled faintly. Official stories usually exist because people prefer them. What was heard? A scream. Miss Finch remained silent. A man's scream, Mrs. Harrow continued, loud enough for half the village to hear. The shop seemed suddenly smaller. Dust floated through afternoon sunlight. Outside, a cart rolled slowly along the lane. Who reported hearing it? Miss Finch asked. Nearly everyone. Yet no investigation followed. Mrs. Harrow's smile faded. Because by morning the east wing was closed. Immediately. Yes. And the key. The old woman looked surprised. You know about the key? Perhaps. Mrs. Harrow leaned closer. There were always rumors about a key. What sort of rumors? That it disappeared. Miss Finch's eyes narrowed. When? The morning after Mr. Ashbourne died. The old woman spoke softly now. So when people say a key has suddenly returned after 20 years. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. By evening, Miss Finch was back at Birchwood House. Darkness settled early beneath gathering clouds. The house felt quieter than before. Watchful, waiting, As she climbed the staircase, Alice hurried toward her. The maid looked frightened. "Miss Finch, what is it?" "I found something." "Where?" "In the old linen room." The girl glanced around to ensure they were alone. Then she produced a small leather notebook. Its cover was cracked with age. Dust clung to its edges. "Why is this important?" Alice swallowed. "Because it wasn't there yesterday." Miss Finch accepted the notebook. The leather felt cold. Very cold. She opened it carefully. Most pages were blank. Several had been torn out. Only one contained writing. A single sentence, written in fading blue ink. The key was hidden where she could never reach it. Beneath the sentence appeared a date. October 17, 20 years ago. And below the date was a name. Not Clara. Not Julian. Not Beatrice. Miss Finch stared at it for several seconds, then slowly closed the notebook. Because the name belonged to a woman whom everyone in Birchwood village believed had died 20 years earlier. Chapter 3. The locked cabinet and the key found inside it. Miss Eleanor Finch slept little that night. The name in the notebook remained fixed in her thoughts like a lantern shining through fog. She had not shown it to anyone. Not yet. Some discoveries grew more useful when allowed to remain quiet. Outside her window, Birchwood House rested beneath a moon hidden behind drifting clouds. The gardens lay silver and black. The old east wing stood motionless at the edge of the building, its boarded windows staring blindly into darkness. Yet something about the house felt different now, as though it had become aware that questions were being asked. The following morning arrived with pale sunlight and a sharp autumn wind. At breakfast, Julian appeared distracted. Clara seemed anxious. Beatrice spoke scarcely at all. Only Mr. Rusk remained composed. Too composed, Miss Finch thought. After the meal, she wandered through the library, while the others attended to various matters of the estate. The room occupied the western side of the house and smelled pleasantly of leather bindings, dust, and old paper. Tall windows overlooked the lawns. She had nearly completed a circuit of the room when something caught her attention. A narrow cabinet stood between two bookcases. It was made of dark oak and appeared entirely ordinary, except for one detail. Its lock had recently been polished. The brass gleamed more brightly than the surrounding wood. Miss Finch paused. The cabinet itself looked old. The lock looked used. She examined it carefully. No scratches. No signs of forcing. Someone had been opening it regularly. Yet the cabinet stood locked. A curious combination. At that moment, Clara entered carrying several letters. "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize you were here." Miss Finch gestured toward the cabinet. "What is kept inside?" Clara frowned. "I've no idea." "You don't have the key?" "No." "When was it last opened?" "I couldn't tell you." Her answer sounded sincere. Miss Finch watched her a moment longer. "Who owns it?" "I suppose technically the house does. An object owned by everyone is usually owned by no one." Clara smiled faintly. "My uncle collected furniture. Most of it arrived before I was born." Miss Finch nodded. The conversation ended there, but the cabinet remained in her thoughts. That afternoon, she found herself in the company of Alice. The maid seemed increasingly nervous. "Has anything else appeared unexpectedly?" Miss Finch asked. Alice hesitated, then nodded. "There was a key." Miss Finch looked up. "A key? In the sewing room yesterday. Why wasn't it mentioned?" The girl shifted uneasily. "Because it disappeared." Miss Finch became very still. "Tell me exactly what happened." Alice lowered her voice. "I found it on the windowsill." "What sort of key?" "Small brass, very old." "Did anyone see it?" "No." "What did you do?" "I left it there while I fetched Mrs. Vale." "And when you returned?" "It was gone." The corridor felt colder suddenly. "Are you certain it existed?" The maid met her gaze. Yes, Miss Finch believed her. People lied in many ways. Fear seldom resembled imagination. Later, while walking through the ground floor corridor, she encountered Beatrice alone. The older woman stood before a portrait, her attention fixed upon the painted face of her late husband. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Beatrice said quietly, "You think someone is trying to tell us something?" It was not a question. Miss Finch folded her hands. "I think someone wants us to notice certain things and ignore others." Possibly. A faint smile touched Beatrice's lips. "You are wiser than most investigators." Miss Finch looked toward the portrait. "Your husband appears stern." He was. Was he secretive? The smile vanished. He believed some doors should remain closed. "And did you agree?" Beatrice's eyes returned to the painting. "Not always." The answer seemed to cost her something. Before Miss Finch could continue, the older woman walked away, leaving the question unfinished. The day drifted onward. Clouds gathered once more. By evening, rain tapped softly against the windows. Dinner passed in uneasy conversation. Everyone appeared to be waiting for something. No one knew what. Afterward, Miss Finch returned to the library. The cabinet stood exactly where she had left it. Silent, locked, watching. The room was empty. She approached once again. This time she noticed something she had overlooked before. A faint line in the carpet. Very faint, running from beneath the cabinet toward the nearby fireplace. She crouched. The mark resembled the track left by furniture, moved repeatedly across a floor. Interesting. Very interesting. The cabinet had not always stood here. Or perhaps it still moved. She examined the hearth. Nothing unusual. Then her gaze settled upon one particular stone. It sat slightly higher than the others. Only by a fraction. Miss Finch pressed it gently. A click sounded. Soft, mechanical, somewhere behind her. She turned. The cabinet door had opened. Only an inch. Enough to reveal darkness within. Miss Finch rose slowly. The room seemed suddenly very quiet. Rain whispered against the windows. The fire crackled softly. She pulled the door open. Inside lay several shelves. Most were empty. A few held old account books. Nothing remarkable, except for a small wooden box resting on the highest shelf. Dust covered everything else. Not the box. She lifted it carefully. The lid was unlocked. Inside rested a single key. Silver, elegant, far older than the black key that had appeared on the salver. A narrow strip of faded blue ribbon remained tied through its bow. Miss Finch stared. The same ribbon, or from the same roll. The discovery raised an immediate question. Why hide a key inside a locked cabinet opened by a concealed mechanism? But another question followed quickly behind. Which key had been hidden first? The silver one, or the black one? She examined the box further. A folded piece of paper lay beneath the key. The note contained only 3 words. For the second door. Nothing more. No signature. No date. Miss Finch slipped the note into her pocket. Then froze. A reflection moved in the library window. Someone standing outside. Watching. The figure vanished immediately. By the time she reached the door and stepped into the corridor, nobody remained. Only silence. And rain. The following morning brought a new disturbance. A shout echoed through the house shortly after dawn. Doors opened. Footsteps hurried across corridors. Miss Finch emerged from her room to find Clara pale with alarm. What happened? The study. Together they hurried downstairs. Several servants had gathered outside the room. Julian stood among them. His face had gone white. The study door hung open. Inside, drawers had been pulled out. Books scattered across the floor. Papers tossed everywhere. Someone had searched the room during the night. Not randomly. Desperately, Miss Finch entered slowly. Her eyes moved across overturned chairs, open cabinets, and emptied shelves. Then she noticed something peculiar. One drawer had been ignored entirely. Unlike the others, it remained perfectly closed. Too perfectly. She opened it. Inside lay nothing except a sealed envelope. Upon the front, written in elegant blue ink, appeared 6 words. "Do not let Beatrice read this." And beneath the warning was a name. The same name that had appeared in the notebook 20 years earlier. Chapter 4. The family portrait that watched the hallway at midnight. Miss Eleanor Finch did not open the envelope immediately. She stood in the ransacked study while the others watched. The room felt strangely intimate despite the disorder. Whoever had searched it had not merely been looking for something. They had been afraid of not finding it. That distinction mattered. Julian moved closer. "Well," Miss Finch looked at the seal. The paper was old, older than the disturbance surrounding it. The edges had yellowed slightly, and the blue ink of the warning had faded with time. "This wasn't placed here last night," she said quietly. Clara frowned. "How can you tell?" "The dust beneath it is undisturbed." Mr. Rusk's gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. Miss Finch noticed. She always noticed. Carefully, she broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet. Only a few lines had been written. The handwriting matched neither the recent notes nor the sentence in the notebook. Yet one phrase immediately drew her attention. "If the portrait is ever moved, everything will be lost." Nothing else explained the statement. No signature appeared. No indication of which portrait. No indication of what might be lost. The message ended there. Silence settled over the study. Julian laughed softly. "A portrait, wonderful. Our mysterious correspondent has become dramatic." Nobody joined him. Beatrice stared at the letter with an expression Miss Finch could not entirely decipher. Fear? Recognition? Possibly both. That afternoon, Miss Finch walked through Birchwood House studying the portraits. There were many. Generations of Ashbournes watched from paneled walls and staircases. Judges, soldiers, merchants, widows, children. Most were exactly what one would expect. Only one felt different. It hung in the long northern hallway leading toward the sealed east wing. A large family portrait painted nearly 30 years earlier. The entire household of that era appeared together beneath a summer sky. The late Mr. Ashbourne stood at the center. Beside him stood Beatrice, much younger then. Several relatives clustered nearby. Among them was a young woman whose face instantly caught Miss Finch's attention. Not because she recognized it, because someone had attempted to obscure it. The damage was subtle. A thin scratch across the painted features. Nothing obvious. Nothing accidental. Someone had wanted the face blurred without attracting notice. Miss Finch stepped closer. The eyes remained visible. Bright, direct, almost alive. A small brass plaque beneath the frame listed the names of those depicted. One name had been removed. Not painted over. Removed. The plaque itself showed an empty space where an engraved strip once rested. Interesting. Very interesting. That evening rain returned once more. Birchwood House seemed to collect storms. Wind moved through the trees surrounding the estate. Branches tapped softly against distant windows. Dinner passed quietly. Conversation drifted toward harmless subjects. No one mentioned keys. No one mentioned notebooks. No one mentioned portraits, which made Miss Finch increasingly certain that everyone was thinking about them. Afterward, she found herself seated beside Beatrice in the drawing room. The older woman watched flames move within the fireplace. "You have been studying the family portrait." It was not a question. Miss Finch folded her hands. "Yes, and the missing name interests me." Beatrice remained silent. "The scratched face interests me even more." The fire crackled softly. At last Beatrice spoke. "Some memories become dangerous." "To whom?" "Anyone who keeps them." The answer hung between them. Before Miss Finch could continue, Beatrice rose and left the room. The conversation felt unfinished. Deliberately unfinished. Near midnight, Miss Finch found herself awake. The house had settled into silence. Moonlight drifted faintly through her curtains. Something had disturbed her sleep. Not a sound, a feeling, the peculiar sensation that somewhere nearby another person remained awake. She sat up, listened. Nothing. Then came a soft creak. Very distant, followed by another. Floorboards. Someone moving through the house. Miss Finch slipped on her dressing gown and stepped into the corridor. Darkness filled the hallway. Only scattered moonlight illuminated the floor. The sound came again. Ahead, toward the north corridor, toward the family portrait. She walked quietly. The house seemed larger at night, more secretive. Every doorway concealed shadows. Every shadow suggested movement. As she approached the northern hallway, she noticed something strange. Light, very faint, a narrow beam crossing the floor. Someone carried a lantern. Miss Finch moved silently until she reached the corner. Then she stopped. The hallway beyond appeared empty. No lantern, no figure, only the portrait hanging upon the wall. Watching, the moonlight fell directly across it. For several moments, she simply observed. Then she saw it. The frame. It was not flush against the wall. One side projected outward slightly, as though recently disturbed. Miss Finch approached. The air felt unusually cold. She placed a hand upon the frame. Carefully, gently, the portrait moved. Not much. Enough. Behind it, something clicked. A hidden mechanism. The sound echoed faintly through the wall. She waited. Nothing happened. Then a voice spoke behind her. "Please don't." Miss Finch turned. Clara stood several yards away, pale in the moonlight, wrapped in a dark robe. "You knew," Miss Finch said. Clara looked toward the portrait. "I knew there was something unusual about it. You have moved it before." The younger woman hesitated, then nodded. "Once." "Why?" Her answer came almost as a whisper. "Because 20 years ago I saw someone come out of it." The silence afterward felt immense. Wind moved outside. Branches brushed the windows. Miss Finch studied her carefully. "You never told anyone." "No one believed me." "Who came through?" Clara lowered her eyes. "I couldn't see clearly." "Was it a man?" "I don't know." "A woman?" "I don't know." Fear had returned to her face now. Old fear. Long-buried fear. "The person disappeared into the east wing," Clara said softly. Miss Finch looked back toward the portrait. The hidden mechanism. The wall behind it. The possibility of a concealed passage. Everything seemed to shift slightly into a new arrangement. Not clearer. More complicated. Far more complicated. Suddenly a sharp sound echoed somewhere deep within the house. A door slamming. Hard. Violently. Both women froze. The sound had come from above. The third floor. A part of Birchwood house rarely used. Another noise followed. A crash. Then silence. Absolute silence. Clara gripped Miss Finch's arm. "Did you hear that?" "Yes." Neither moved immediately. The house seemed to be listening, waiting. Then from somewhere high above them came the faint sound of footsteps running across the floor. Not toward them, away from them. And a moment later, drifting down through the darkness of the stairwell, came a voice. A woman's voice. Soft, distant, almost impossible to hear, yet unmistakable. She's found the portrait. Then the house fell silent once more. Chapter 5. Footsteps beyond the library door and the letter without a signature. Neither Miss Elena Finch nor Clara spoke for several moments. The words lingered in the darkness. She's found the portrait. Not she found it. Not she moved it. Found it, as though the portrait itself mattered more than the hidden mechanism behind it. The distinction troubled Miss Finch. The sound of running footsteps had vanished. Whatever person had crossed the third floor was already gone. Or hiding. Clara tightened her grip on Miss Finch's arm. We should wake the others. Not yet. You heard that voice. Yes. Then someone is inside the house. Miss Finch glanced toward the upper staircase. I suspect someone has been inside the house for quite some time. The answer did little to comfort Clara. They eventually returned to their rooms, though sleep came reluctantly. Birchwood House seemed unusually awake that night. Several times Miss Finch found herself listening. The wind, the old timbers, a distant creak somewhere beyond the walls. Once she thought she heard footsteps again. Very faint, moving through the hidden spaces of the house. Then silence returned. Morning arrived beneath low gray clouds. At breakfast, the atmosphere felt strained. Something had changed. Miss Finch noticed it immediately. Julian seemed agitated. Mr. Rusk appeared distracted. Even Beatrice looked unsettled. Only Clara seemed determined to conceal her anxiety. The conversation remained polite but thin. Everyone appeared to be measuring everyone else. Afterward, Miss Finch found herself alone in the library. The room offered a comforting stillness. Tall shelves, soft light, the faint scent of old paper. She settled into a chair near the window and began examining several documents taken from the study. Nothing remarkable appeared. Estate accounts, letters, property records, routine matters. Yet something drew her attention repeatedly. The library door. Not the door itself. The space beyond it. A curious sensation lingered at the edge of her awareness. The feeling of being observed. Eventually, she set down the papers. Waited. Listened. The room remained silent. Then came a sound. A footstep. Soft. Careful. Immediately outside the library. Miss Finch did not move. Another step followed. Then another. Someone was standing beyond the door. Not passing. Waiting. The handle remained still. No knock came. No voice. Only silence. Miss Finch rose quietly and crossed the room. The footsteps ceased. She opened the door. The corridor stood empty. Sunlight filtered through distant windows. Nothing moved. Yet near the threshold lay a folded piece of paper. Freshly placed, she bent and picked it up. The note contained only one sentence. Trust neither the dead nor the living. No signature. No explanation. The handwriting differed from every note she had seen thus far. Different pressure, different style, different hand, or perhaps someone wanted her to believe that. Miss Finch folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. The message raised more questions than it answered, particularly the reference to the dead, because increasingly Birchwood House seemed occupied by them. That afternoon rain returned. A steady autumn rain. Not violent, persistent, the sort of weather that encouraged secrets. Miss Finch spent several hours studying the family portrait more closely. The hidden mechanism interested her. The missing name interested her even more. With Clara's permission, she obtained several old family albums from storage. Dust covered them heavily. Few people had opened them in years. Page after page revealed forgotten gatherings. Garden parties, birthdays, Christmas dinners, faces repeated. Some aged, some disappeared. Then she found her, the scratched woman from the portrait, younger in one photograph, standing beside Beatrice, laughing, alive. The image had been taken years before the events now troubling Birchwood House. Miss Finch examined the back. A caption had been written there. Most of the ink had faded. Only 2 words remained legible. My sister. Nothing else. No name. No date. But the discovery unsettled her, because Beatrice had never mentioned having a sister. Not once. Late in the afternoon, she sought out the older woman. She found her sitting alone in the conservatory watching rain strike the glass roof. The garden beyond appeared blurred and dreamlike. Miss Finch sat beside her. For a while neither spoke. Then Miss Finch placed the photograph on the table. Beatrice looked down. Her expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. Old recognition. Painful recognition. You knew her, Miss Finch said softly. The older woman's eyes remained fixed upon the photograph. Yes. Who was she? Silence stretched between them. Rain whispered overhead. Finally, Beatrice answered. A mistake. Miss Finch frowned. A person is not a mistake. Sometimes families disagree. That is not what I asked. Beatrice closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something guarded had returned. You are asking questions that cannot be answered safely. Cannot. Should not. The distinction mattered. Miss Finch noticed that as well. Before any further conversation could occur, a servant entered hurriedly. Mrs. Vale. The woman turned. Yes. There is someone asking for you. Who? The servant hesitated. He won't give a name. The conservatory suddenly felt colder. Where is he? At the front door. Beatrice rose immediately. Too quickly. Far too quickly. Miss Finch watched her leave. Something about the reaction seemed wrong. Not fear. Expectation. As though she had been waiting for the visitor. Several minutes later, curiosity led Miss Finch toward the entrance hall. The visitor was gone. So was Beatrice. Only Alice remained nearby. The maid appeared puzzled. Did you see him? Miss Finch asked. Yes, miss. What was he like? Alice frowned. Old. Anyone from the village? I don't think so. Did he speak with Mrs. Vale? Yes. What happened then? The maid looked uncertain. They argued. About what? I couldn't hear. Then, he gave her something. Miss Finch felt a slight tightening in her chest. What? A letter? That evening Beatrice joined dinner, as though nothing unusual had occurred. Yet several times, Miss Finch noticed her touching the pocket of her dress. Checking, reassuring herself, protecting something. The letter. After dinner, the household gradually retired. Rain continued falling. The house settled into silence. Near midnight, Miss Finch found herself unable to sleep. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Urgent. She left her room. The corridor lay empty. Moonlight drifted through the windows. Then she saw it. A narrow line of light beneath the library door. Someone was inside. At this hour, she approached quietly. The light vanished. Instantly, as though a lamp had been extinguished. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Not in the corridor. Inside the library. Moving rapidly away. Miss Finch opened the door. The room was dark, empty, silent, yet the window stood open. Rain blew gently through it. The curtains stirred, and on the desk lay a single envelope. No name, no seal, no signature, only one folded sheet inside. Miss Finch opened it. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, almost desperate. If Beatrice has received the letter, then it is already too late. Do not trust the portrait. The truth is hidden behind the second face. Miss Finch read the sentence twice, then a third time. The truth is hidden behind the second face. She lowered the paper slowly, and at that exact moment, she noticed something she had never seen before. On the far wall of the library hung another family portrait. Smaller, less important, easily overlooked. And in the dim moonlight, one of the painted faces appeared to be missing. Chapter 6. Miss Marple notices what everyone else overlooks. Miss Eleanor Finch remained perfectly still. The moonlight drifting through the library window painted pale shapes across the walls, and in that uncertain light, the smaller portrait appeared subtly wrong. Not damaged, not altered, wronged. She approached slowly. The painting depicted a gathering of family members seated around a garden table many years earlier. Faces smiled politely. Teacups rested upon white cloth. Summer sunlight had been captured in oils and preserved long after the afternoon itself had vanished. Yet one face seemed strangely absent. Not removed entirely, rather obscured. A layer of paint had been added later. Carefully, skillfully, someone had transformed a face into a patch of shadow. Miss Finch examined the frame. Dust rested along the upper edge, except in one corner. There the dust had recently been disturbed. She touched it gently. Fresh, very fresh. Someone had handled the portrait recently, perhaps only hours ago. The thought lingered with her as she returned to her room. Sleep proved impossible. By morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight filtered through drifting mist beyond the windows. The estate seemed peaceful, almost innocent. Birchwood House excelled at appearing innocent. That, Miss Finch reflected during breakfast, was one of its more suspicious qualities. Conversation moved lazily around the table. Julian discussed village matters. Clara attempted to sound cheerful. Mr. Rusk appeared unusually attentive. Beatrice remained silent. Miss Finch listened, observed, and noticed something no one else appeared to notice. Beatrice had not once touched the pocket containing the mysterious letter. Not once. The previous evening, she had checked it repeatedly, almost obsessively. Now she ignored it entirely, as though the letter was no longer there, or no longer important. The change interested Miss Finch. People often revealed more through altered habits than spoken words. After breakfast, she wandered into the entrance hall. The large staircase curved upward gracefully. Morning light streamed through the stained glass window. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, except for the flowers. A vase of white lilies stood upon a side table, freshly arranged, beautiful, and entirely wrong. Miss Finch stopped. Birchwood House employed roses during autumn. Everyone knew that. Clara had mentioned it herself. Yet someone had replaced the roses with lilies. Why? A trivial detail, perhaps. Most people would never notice. Miss Finch noticed. She called Alice. The maid arrived promptly. "These flowers," Miss Finch said. "Yes, miss." "Who arranged them?" Alice looked surprised. "No one, miss. Someone must have. They were delivered this morning." "From whom?" "I don't know." "Was there a card?" The maid hesitated. "Yes." "Where is it?" "I threw it away." Miss Finch smiled gently. "Would you mind retrieving it?" Several minutes later, Alice returned carrying a small cream-colored card. Blank. Completely blank. No message. No name. No florist. Nothing. Miss Finch studied it thoughtfully. Most people overlooked empty things. Empty cards. Empty rooms. Empty spaces in paintings. Yet emptiness often existed for a reason. She slipped the card into her pocket. The day passed quietly. Too quietly. By late afternoon, clouds had returned. The house seemed to be waiting again, waiting for something unseen. While passing through the north corridor, Miss Finch paused before the large family portrait. The one concealing the hidden mechanism. The one everyone discussed. The one everyone watched. She stood studying it, then slowly turned around. The opposite wall held a narrow table beneath a mirror. Nothing remarkable, except for one detail. The mirror reflected the portrait perfectly, or almost perfectly. Miss Finch stepped closer. The reflection revealed something difficult to see directly. A slight bulge in the wall beside the frame. Barely visible. Invisible from most angles. Visible in the mirror. Interesting. Very interesting. She pressed gently upon the paneling. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. Yet the discovery remained important. Because hidden passages rarely required only one entrance. That evening, a storm gathered beyond the trees. Wind moved through the grounds. Branches swayed. The atmosphere inside Birchwood House grew increasingly strained. Dinner conversation faltered repeatedly. Julian appeared restless. Mr. Rusk drank more wine than usual. Clara seemed distracted. Only Beatrice remained calm. Too calm. Later, while walking alone through the conservatory, Miss Finch noticed another detail. A muddy footprint. Single. Incomplete. Near the far door leading toward the gardens. Not unusual in itself. The unusual aspect was its size. Very small. Smaller than a man's shoe. Too small for Julian. Too small for Mr. Rusk. Possibly a woman. Possibly not. The footprint pointed inward. Someone had entered from outside. But there was no matching footprint leading away. Only one. Just one. As though whoever stepped there had somehow vanished. Miss Finch crouched beside it. The mud remained damp. Recent. Very recent. A sound interrupted her thoughts. The faint creak of a door. Somewhere above. She looked up. The conservatory connected to an upper gallery running along the second floor. Empty. Silent. Yet she could have sworn someone had been watching. By the time she reached the gallery, no one remained. Only darkness. And another small discovery. A handkerchief. Folded neatly upon the floor. White linen. Plain, except for a single embroidered initial. Miss Finch stared at it. Not because the letter itself surprised her, but because she had already encountered that initial more than once during her stay at Birchwood House. The notebook, the missing name, the erased face, the woman everyone seemed reluctant to discuss. She slipped the handkerchief into her pocket. Outside, thunder rolled across distant hills. Night arrived. The storm intensified. Rain struck the windows. The house settled into uneasy silence. Near midnight, Miss Finch sat beside her bedroom fire reviewing her notes. Keys, portraits, letters, hidden mechanisms, missing names. Every answer seemed attached to another question. Then she noticed something. Not among the notes. Among the envelopes. One envelope lay slightly apart from the others. The paper felt thicker. Older. She examined it carefully. At first glance, it appeared blank. Then she held it toward the firelight. A faint watermark emerged. Not a watermark. Writing, hidden writing, words visible only when illuminated from behind. Miss Finch moved closer to the flames. Slowly, carefully, the message emerged line by line. Meet me where the first key was never meant to be found. Tonight, midnight, come alone. No signature, no explanation. Only those words. Miss Finch checked the clock. 11:53. 7 minutes remained. The storm battered Birchwood house. Wind howled through the trees. Somewhere deep within the house, a door slammed. And for the first time since arriving at Birchwood, Miss Eleanor Finch found herself wondering whether someone wanted to reveal the truth, or whether someone intended to ensure she never discovered it. Chapter 7. The confession that appeared to solve everything. Miss Eleanor Finch studied the photograph until dawn. The image refused to leave her thoughts, not because of the familiar faces, because of the unfamiliar one. The partially hidden figure visible through the entrance hall window stood directly beside the Birchwood clock. Watching, waiting, almost unnoticed. Almost. The message written on the reverse of the photograph troubled her even more. You have been looking at the wrong family. It sounded less like a warning and more like a correction, as though someone had become impatient with the direction of her investigation. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of old silver. The storm had passed. Mist drifted across the lawns. Birchwood house appeared calm once again. Miss Finch had learned not to trust calm. At breakfast, she studied everyone carefully. Clara looked exhausted. Julian appeared unusually confident. Mr. Rusk remained thoughtful. The mysterious woman sat beside Beatrice, their resemblance impossible to ignore now that both occupied the same room. No one mentioned the photograph. No one mentioned the hidden compartment within the key. No one mentioned the stopped clock. Everyone seemed to be waiting. Again, always waiting. Eventually, Julian set down his cup. I think this should end. The statement drew immediate attention. He rose slowly, straightened his jacket, and for the first time since Miss Finch's arrival, he appeared completely certain of himself. A dangerous thing, certainty, particularly in a house built upon secrets. I know what happened 20 years ago. Silence settled over the breakfast table. Even the servants seemed to pause. Julian looked toward the mysterious woman, then toward Beatrice, then toward Miss Finch. There is no reason to continue pretending. His voice remained calm, measured, prepared. The performance had been rehearsed. Miss Finch noticed. Arthur Ashbourne discovered the truth about his family. Julian continued. He intended to expose it. Nobody interrupted. An argument followed in the East Wing. His eyes settled upon the mysterious woman. You killed him. The accusation landed heavily. Yet the woman did not react with surprise. Only sadness. Almost relief. Julian pressed forward. You fled, the family concealed the truth. The keys were used to hide evidence. The wing was sealed. The story was buried. The explanation sounded remarkably complete. Remarkably reasonable. Remarkably satisfying. Which made Miss Finch distrusted immediately. People enjoyed solutions. Reality rarely cooperated. The woman slowly stood. Her face had become pale. I won't deny it. Clara gasped softly. Julian nodded. There. The triumph in his voice seemed genuine. It's finished. The woman lowered her eyes. I was there that night. Then tell them. For a moment she appeared to age. Years seemed to settle upon her shoulders. Then she spoke. I argued with Arthur. The room remained utterly silent. He threatened to reveal everything. Her voice trembled. We fought. Nobody moved. He fell. The confession appeared devastating. Simple, Direct. Believable. Several people looked visibly shaken. Even Clara seemed convinced. Only Miss Finch remained unconvinced. Not because the woman lied. Because she omitted. Every sentence felt carefully selected. Every answer seemed designed to close doors. And Birchwood House was a house full of doors. Julian appeared satisfied. Almost too satisfied. Then that's it. No, Miss Finch said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. The room grew still. Why not? Julian asked. Because your solution answers the wrong questions. The confidence in his expression faltered slightly. Miss Finch folded her hands. You say Arthur discovered a family secret. Yes. What secret? Julian hesitated. Only briefly. But long enough. You know perfectly well. No, said Miss Finch, I don't. Silence. The woman who had confessed remained standing. Watching. Listening. Miss Finch continued. You say the keys concealed evidence. Yes. What evidence? Again hesitation. Tiny. Meaningful. Documents. Which documents? Julian's expression hardened. You're avoiding the obvious. No. Miss Finch smiled gently. I'm asking for details. The room remained silent. Details were dangerous things. They exposed weak foundations. Julian eventually sat down. The certainty had begun to fade. That interested Miss Finch. Very much. The remainder of the day passed beneath an uneasy tension. The confession should have solved everything. Instead, it seemed to have complicated everything further. Several servants whispered nervously. Clara appeared increasingly confused. Beatrice remained withdrawn. The mysterious woman avoided everyone. Only Julian seemed frustrated, as though events had refused to follow the script he expected. Late that afternoon, Miss Finch wandered through the old gallery, overlooking the entrance hall. The stopped Birchwood clock remained below. Silent, motionless, a monument to interruption. She paused, looked down, then noticed something curious. A reflection, not in the clock, in the polished floor beneath it. A faint reflection of the stained glass window. Most people would never have noticed. Most people looked directly at things. Miss Finch preferred reflections. Reflections often revealed what direct observation concealed. She descended the staircase, crossed the hall, and stood beside the clock. The colored light falling through the stained glass formed patterns across the floor. Blue, gold, green, and one narrow stripe of red. The red stripe pointed directly toward a section of wall beside the clock. Interesting. Very interesting. She examined the paneling. Nothing unusual. Then she noticed a tiny scratch. Fresh. Recent. Not 20 years old. Not even 20 days old. Someone had been here recently. Searching or retrieving. She pressed lightly against the wood. A hollow sound answered. The wall contained a cavity. Before she could investigate further, footsteps approached behind her. She turned. The mysterious woman stood there. Alone. For several moments, neither spoke. Then the woman handed her a folded piece of paper. What is this? A confession. Miss Finch looked up. A real one. The woman smiled sadly. No. The answer arrived so calmly that it took a moment to register. The woman glanced toward the staircase, ensuring nobody watched, then lowered her voice. The confession this morning was expected. Miss Finch said nothing. The first one was expected too. The implications settled heavily between them. The woman continued. Someone wanted a confession. Why? Because if everyone accepts a confession, nobody continues asking questions. Miss Finch studied her carefully. At last, something honest, something useful. Then why confess at all? The woman looked away, toward the silent clock. Because 20 years ago I promised someone I would. The answer raised more questions than it resolved. Before Miss Finch could ask another, the woman stiffened suddenly, her gaze fixed upon the entrance hall door. A shadow moved beyond the frosted glass. Not a servant, not a resident, someone outside, watching. The woman's face lost all color. No, the word escaped almost involuntarily. The front door handle began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, the door opened. A cold gust entered the hall, and standing upon the threshold was an elderly man carrying a weathered leather case. His eyes moved immediately to the mysterious woman, then to Miss Finch, then to the silent clock. For several seconds, nobody spoke. At last, the stranger removed his hat and said the one thing capable of silencing the entire house. "I've come because the witness is dead." Chapter 8. The secret hidden behind the Birchwood clock. For several moments, no one spoke. The storm continued beyond the broken window, sending cold air through the hidden room. Rain tapped against the roof. Somewhere below, Birchwood House groaned softly as though disturbed by old memories. Miss Eleanor Finch remained staring at the carved date. 20 years. Everything seemed to circle back to that single night. The stranger stepped away from the chair. Her face had become pale, not because of the carved symbol, not because of the note, because of the certainty with which the note had anticipated her confession. Someone had known exactly what she would do. Someone had expected it. Someone had been planning several moves ahead. That realization frightened her. Beatrice seemed equally troubled. "Who else knows?" she whispered. The stranger shook her head. "I don't know." For the first time, Miss Finch believed her completely. The fear was genuine, and genuine fear was difficult to imitate. They left the hidden room shortly before dawn. No one suggested returning to sleep. Instead, they gathered in the library. A fire burned low in the grate. Outside, rain softened to a steady whisper. The strange woman sat near the window, wrapped in a blanket Clara had quietly brought her. No one pressed her further about the confession. Miss Finch sensed it would accomplish little. The confession had offered answers. Too many answers. Convenient answers. And convenience rarely accompanied truth. As dawn approached, Miss Finch's attention drifted elsewhere, towards something she had noticed repeatedly throughout her stay. The clock, the great Birchwood clock standing in the entrance hall. Visitors always noticed it. Residents never seemed to. The clock was older than the house itself. Tall, elegant, dark oak polished by generations of hands. Its slow ticking echoed through every corridor. A constant presence, an unquestioned presence, which made it interesting. After breakfast, she wandered alone into the entrance hall. Sunlight filtered weakly through the stained glass. The clock stood precisely where it always had. Watching, waiting, Miss Finch approached it. The face displayed 11 minutes past 10. The pendulum swung steadily behind glass. Nothing unusual. Yet she found herself studying the carving around the clock's frame. Leaves, interlocking leaves, the same design. Again, not identical, similar, close enough. She crouched slightly, examined the lower section. Dust had accumulated around most of the clock, except near the rear panel. There the dust appeared disturbed. Someone had moved it recently. A great many mysteries began because people noticed dramatic things. Miss Finch preferred noticing practical things, like disturbed dust. She walked slowly around the clock. The rear stood only inches from the wall. Enough space for a person to reach behind. Not enough space for a person to hide. Or perhaps enough. That depended entirely on what existed beyond the wall. Interesting. Very interesting. The remainder of the morning passed quietly. Too quietly. The household seemed suspended between uncertainty and expectation. The stranger remained largely unseen. Clara appeared exhausted. Julian avoided everyone. Mr. Rusk spent an unusual amount of time walking through the gardens despite the weather. And Beatrice sat for nearly an hour staring at nothing. Everyone waited. No one knew for what. By afternoon, Miss Finch had obtained permission to examine old architectural plans stored among the estate records. The documents proved incomplete. Several pages were missing. Others had been damaged. Yet one detail immediately stood out. The entrance hall appeared different. Not dramatically different. Subtly, the space behind the clock should have contained a narrow storage recess. A recess that no longer appeared to exist. Or appeared hidden. Miss Finch folded the plans thoughtfully. The clock interested her more than ever. Near sunset, she returned to the entrance hall. The house felt unusually empty. Wind rattled distant windows. The clock ticked steadily. Patiently, she examined the rear panel once more, then placed her fingers along the wood. Searching, feeling, waiting. At first, nothing happened. Then she discovered a slight indentation. Nearly invisible. A tiny carved leaf hidden among the decorative patterns. She pressed it. A click answered. Soft, mechanical. The rear panel shifted outward slightly. Miss Finch smiled. Old houses rarely disappointed. She opened the panel carefully. Inside rested a narrow compartment. Smaller than expected. Much smaller. Just large enough to conceal documents. Or a small object. Or a key. The compartment contained neither documents nor keys. Only a single leather-bound journal. Its cover bore no title. No initials. No identifying marks. Miss Finch removed it carefully. The pages crackled softly as she opened them. Most entries appeared mundane. Estate accounts, appointments, observations. Nothing remarkable. Until she reached the final pages. There the handwriting changed. Became hurried. Uneven. Concerned. Several entries had been torn out entirely. Others remained partially visible. She read quietly. Someone is moving through the passages again. A later entry. The keys were never intended to separate. Then another. If the clock is discovered before the second door is secured. The sentence ended abruptly. The remainder of the page had been removed. Miss Finch turned another page. Nothing. Then another. Blank. Finally, she reached the last surviving entry. The handwriting trembled noticeably. Tonight I saw her standing beside the clock. She should not have been here. No name followed. No explanation. Only those words. Miss Finch closed the journal slowly. Her thoughts moved immediately toward the stranger. Toward the missing woman. Toward the erased face. Yet certainty remained impossible. The entry was undated. The identity unstated. Too many possibilities remained. A sound interrupted her thoughts. Footsteps. Behind her. She turned. No one stood in the hall. The sound came again. Not from the corridor. From inside the wall. Miss Finch remained motionless. Listening. The footsteps continued. Slow. Measured. Moving somewhere beyond the clock. Beyond the hidden compartment. Inside the structure of the house itself. Then they stopped. Silence returned. Several seconds passed. Then came a faint sound. A metallic sound. Like a key touching a lock. Miss Finch stepped closer to the wall. The noise came once more. Very near. Then a voice. barely audible. A whisper, not from the hall, not from the passage beyond, from somewhere hidden inside the wall itself. It's not the second key they're looking for. Miss Finch felt a chill pass through her. The voice belonged neither to the stranger nor to Beatrice. It belonged to someone else, someone she had never heard before. Before she could respond, a second sound echoed from somewhere upstairs. A door slamming violently, followed by Clara's scream. And then, abruptly, the great Birchwood clock stopped ticking. Chapter 9. The night Miss Marple revealed the truth of the locked key. Clara's scream echoed through Birchwood House. For a moment it seemed to hang within the silent corridors, suspended between the storm outside and the sudden stillness inside. The great clock no longer ticked. Its silence felt unnatural, almost deliberate. Miss Eleanor Finch left the hidden compartment open and hurried toward the staircase. The journal remained tucked beneath her arm. As she reached the landing, doors were already opening. Julian appeared from the west corridor. Mr. Rusk emerged from the study. Beatrice and the mysterious woman appeared almost simultaneously from opposite directions. Everyone had heard the scream. Everyone looked frightened, or wished to appear frightened. Clara stood near the upper gallery. One hand covered her mouth. The other pointed toward the end of the corridor, toward the door leading to the old nursery. "Nobody's used that room in years," she whispered. The door hung open. Darkness filled the room beyond. Rain tapped softly against distant windows. No one moved immediately. Then Miss Finch stepped forward. The others followed. The nursery appeared untouched by time. Dust covered the furniture. A rocking horse stood beside the fireplace. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls. The air smelled faintly of age and damp wood. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Miss Finch noticed the rocking horse. Something rested upon its saddle. A key. Not black. Not silver. Brass. The same description Alice had given of the key that appeared and vanished from the sewing room. Miss Finch approached carefully. The brass key looked old. Much older than the others. Its bow carried the now familiar design of interlocking leaves. Julian exhaled sharply. Another key. Nobody answered. The appearance felt almost theatrical. Too perfect. Too timely. Miss Finch lifted it gently. A small tag had been tied to it with faded blue ribbon. 3 words had been written upon it. Not the first. Silence followed. The phrase unsettled everyone. Not the first, meaning there were more. Meaning the black key, the silver key, and now the brass key might belong to a larger arrangement. A collection, a sequence, a purpose. Miss Finch slipped the key into her pocket. Then she noticed something else. Footprints, fresh, visible in the dust, leading toward the far wall. And stopping, simply stopping, as though someone had walked directly into the wall and vanished. The discovery reminded her unpleasantly of other vanished trails throughout Birchwood House. She followed them slowly. The wall appeared solid, yet appearances at Birchwood House had become increasingly unreliable. Miss Finch examined the paneling, pressed gently, waited. Nothing. The wall remained silent. For now, the remainder of the evening passed beneath growing tension. The household gathered in the drawing room. Rain continued outside. The fire burned brightly. No one wished to retire. The stopped clock seemed to affect everyone. A house depended upon familiar sounds. Remove one and everything else felt wrong. Conversation wandered uncertainly. Eventually, Julian broke the silence. This is becoming absurd. Nobody disagreed. Keys appear, notes appear, hidden passages, secret compartments. He stood, pacing slowly. We all know what this is. Miss Finch watched him carefully. What is it? A game. The word surprised everyone. Julian continued. Someone has been manipulating us from the beginning. Why? Clara asked. To frighten us. To what end? Julian hesitated, then looked toward the mysterious woman. Perhaps because certain people wish the past reopened. The accusation lingered. The woman said nothing. Beatrice's expression hardened immediately. Enough. No, Julian replied quietly, not enough. For the first time, genuine anger entered his voice. 20 years of silence, 20 years of lies. The room became still. Miss Finch noticed something important. Not the anger, the timing. Julian had waited until the others were gathered, until witnesses surrounded him. People often revealed truths accidentally while attempting performances. And Julian was performing. The question remained why. Hours later, after the others dispersed, Miss Finch remained alone beside the fire. The journal lay open before her. The final entries troubled her, particularly one detail. The writer repeatedly referred to the locked key. Not a locked door, not a locked room, a locked key. The wording made little sense. Keys open things. They were not themselves locked. Unless, Miss Finch sat upright. Unless the phrase had been literal. Her gaze drifted toward the brass key, then toward the silver key, then toward the black key. 3 keys, different sizes, different ages, yet sharing the same symbol. Suddenly, she remembered something else. The silver key, the note found with it. For the second door, not second room, second door. A very precise choice of words. Interesting, very interesting. Near midnight, she carried all 3 keys to the library. The house had become quiet once more. The stopped clock remained silent downstairs. Moonlight filtered through the windows. Miss Finch arranged the keys upon the desk. Black, silver, brass, 3 pieces of a puzzle. 3 questions waiting to be answered. She examined them carefully, for nearly an hour. Then she noticed it. A tiny seam, almost invisible, along the shaft of the black key. Miss Finch held it beneath the lamp. Yes, definitely a seam. Her pulse quickened slightly. Carefully, she applied pressure. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. Then she remembered the phrase. The locked key. Slowly, she picked up the brass key, placed one against the other. The shapes aligned unexpectedly well. Not perfectly, purposefully. A mechanism clicked. Soft, precise. The black key opened. Not metaphorically, literally. Part of the shaft unfolded, revealing a hidden compartment within. Miss Finch stared. The discovery felt significant. Very significant, yet not triumphant, because the compartment contained neither jewels, nor confessions, nor maps. Only a strip of folded paper. She opened it carefully. A single sentence had been written in faded ink. The third key protects the witness. The words raised more questions than answers. Witness, not victim, not suspect. Witness, someone had seen something 20 years ago. Someone important enough to protect. Someone connected to the keys. A sudden sound interrupted her thoughts. 3 soft knocks. At the library door. Miss Finch looked up. The knocks came again. Slow, measured. She crossed the room and opened the door. No one stood outside. Only darkness, and an envelope resting upon the floorboards. She bent and picked it up. The envelope carried no name, no seal, no signature. Inside rested a photograph. Old, slightly faded, taken 20 years earlier. Miss Finch studied it beneath the lamp. Several people stood outside Birchwood House. Among them were Beatrice, Arthur Ashbourne, the mysterious woman, and others. At first, the image appeared ordinary. Then Miss Finch noticed the figure standing in the background, partially hidden behind the Birchwood clock, visible through the entrance hall window. A figure no one had mentioned. A figure she had never seen before. And written across the back of the photograph in fresh blue ink were 7 words. "You have been looking at the wrong family." Chapter 10. The morning Birchwood House finally let go of its secrets. The elderly man stood in the entrance hall, while the first light of morning gathered behind him. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his coat. His leather case hung from one hand. His face was lined not merely by age, but by years spent carrying something he had never been allowed to put down. Beatrice was the first to speak. "Dr. Harrow." The name moved through Birchwood House like a key turning at last. Miss Eleanor Finch looked from him to Beatrice, then to the woman who had twice confessed and never quite told the truth. "The witness," Miss Finch said softly. "You mean Alice's mother?" Dr. Harrow closed his eyes. "Yes." Clara gave a small sound of surprise. "But Alice's mother died years ago." "She died last night," said Dr. Harrow. "In the village infirmary. Before she died, she asked me to bring this." He opened the leather case. Inside lay 3 things: a folded statement, a faded strip of blue ribbon, and a small painted miniature of a child. Miss Finch looked at the miniature first. A little girl with dark eyes stood beside the Birchwood clock. "The child in the hidden room," she said, "the witness protected by the 3rd key." Beatrice sat down slowly upon the lower stair. The mysterious woman bowed her head. Her name, Miss Finch now knew, was Evelyn Ashbourne, Beatrice's younger sister, scratched from portraits, erased from plaques, and declared dead by a family that had preferred silence to scandal. Dr. Harrow handed Miss Finch the statement. The handwriting was weak but clear. Miss Finch read aloud, her voice quiet in the morning hall. "I was nursery maid at Birchwood House. On the night of October 17th, I saw Mr. Arthur Ashbourne arguing with Mr. Julian's father beside the clock. Miss Evelyn came afterward. She did not kill him. She found him fallen. The master still breathed then. Mr. Rusk helped seal the passage before the doctor was called. The child saw everything." Julian's face changed. "Not dramatically. Only enough." Miss Finch turned to him. "Your father was the man in the photograph," she said. "The one behind the clock." Julian said nothing. Mr. Rusk moved toward the study door, but Dr. Harrow stepped aside, revealing 2 village constables waiting beyond the threshold. Miss Finch continued, gently but firmly. "Arthur Ashbourne discovered that Julian's father was not merely a poor relation. He had been diverting estate funds for years with Mr. Rusk's help. Arthur meant to expose him. There was a quarrel by the clock near the hidden passage. Arthur fell or was pushed. The witness was the child who had wandered from the nursery and seen the men moving his body toward the east wing." Clara whispered, "The child." Miss Finch looked at her with compassion. "You?" The color left Clara's face. "You were very young, too young to understand, but not too young to remember shapes, sounds, and fear. Someone coming out of the portrait, footsteps behind walls, a door slamming, a scream. Your mind kept fragments." Beatrice began to weep silently. Evelyn crossed to her sister and knelt beside her. "I confessed because I promised Mother I would keep Clara safe," Evelyn said. "If they believed I was guilty, they would stop searching for the child witness. Beatrice helped me vanish. The family erased me so the story could stand." "The keys?" Clara asked faintly. Miss Finch laid them upon the hall table. The black key held the message. The brass key protected the witness. The silver key opened the second door, the hidden entrance behind the clock. They were never meant for one lock. They were a system of protection. Arthur made them when he began to fear what he had uncovered. "And the recent notes?" Julian asked coldly. Miss Finch looked at him. "Some were Evelyn's, meant to guide me. Some were yours, meant to frighten us toward a false confession. You wanted the second key because you believed Arthur's missing evidence still lay behind the clock." Dr. Harrow removed the final packet from his case. "It did." Mr. Rusk sank into a chair. Inside the packet were ledgers, signed receipts, and one letter in Arthur Ashbourne's hand naming Julian's father and Edmund Rusk as thieves. Not murderers, but thieves. The murder had followed because theft had been discovered. The house seemed to exhale. By noon, the sealed passage behind the Birchwood clock had been opened. It led through the wall, behind the portrait, and into the east wing, where dust lay thick upon rooms abandoned for 20 years. In one chamber they found the old nursery chair, the carved leaves, and a child's blue hair ribbon tied beneath the seat. Clara touched it with trembling fingers. "I remember," she whispered, "not everything, but enough." Beatrice held her. Evelyn stood apart at first, uncertain whether she had any right to comfort or be comforted. Then Clara turned and reached for her hand. No one spoke. They did not need to. By evening, the constables had taken Julian and Mr. Rusk away. Dr. Harrow returned to the village with the air of a man who had fulfilled an old promise. The storm had passed entirely, leaving the gardens washed clean beneath a pale gold sky. Miss Finch prepared to leave the following morning. Before she went, Clara met her in the entrance hall. The Birchwood clock had begun ticking again. Not loudly, not triumphantly, simply steadily, as though time, interrupted for 20 years, had resumed. "What will become of the East Wing?" Clara asked. Miss Finch looked toward the corridor where sunlight now reached through open doors. "That depends on whether you wish it to remain a tomb." Clara shook her head. "No, I think it should have windows again." Miss Finch smiled. "A wise beginning." At the door, Evelyn and Beatrice stood together beneath the family portrait. The scratched face would be restored. The missing name would return to the plaque. Not all wounds could be undone, but some silences could at last be ended. Miss Eleanor Finch stepped outside into the clear morning. Behind her, Birchwood House stood among the wet trees, no longer watchful, no longer afraid. And as the clock struck 9, its sound drifted through the open door, gentle and certain, carrying with it the feeling of a house that had finally let go of its secrets.